So I'm sitting here reading my actual quiet time reading, not necessarily the reading that I do on here on this platform. And something stood out to me. I'm in First Chronicles. And Chronicles basically goes through to fill in the stories that we have in the Old Testament. And it also gives you the genealogy of the people in the Bible. So some would say, like, technically it's a good place to place it at the end of the Old Testament, but remember that these books are not in any particular order. So I am at the story of David in First Chronicles right now. And in chapter 12, verse 18, it says, Then the Spirit came on Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, We are yours, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Success, success to you, and success to those who help you, for your God will help you. So David received them and made them leaders of his raiding bands. Some of the tribe of Manasseh came to David when he went with the Philistines to fight against Saul. When David went to Ziklag, these were the men of Manasseh who defected to him. Then they listed the men. These people are literally just walking up to him and saying, Hey, we're leaving that side. We're coming to you. And notice in verse 18, it says, Then the Spirit came on Amasai. However you pronounce that. Basically, God sent those people to David. If you don't know the story of David, I'm just going to give you a very quick rundown of the end of that story. I really want to do a whole video on his story because it's amazing. It literally shows you this is how you learn who God is. You study these scriptures to see how God worked in other people's lives. And then you get to learn, like, oh, that's how God works. And that's how he's working in my life if it relates to your life. So David was anointed. 40 years later, he was appointed. He had an appointed time. He fought Goliath. And you just see God working in David's life all throughout. We dip in and out of, like, the story of Saul and David, and then David pops up at the right time at certain times in Saul's life. And basically what the scriptures do is kind of foreshadow David's crowning. You know that God is working in David's life. They make that very clear, but you don't know exactly what is to come, unless, of course, you've already read it. So you get to see how David reaches these different heights, someone who nobody saw as important at all. And then he becomes king. They crown him king, okay? Now, he didn't go out and say, oh, I need this person, I need this person. He didn't do anything in his might. God literally sent these people to him. These are people that were actually on an opposing side. Let me go back to verse 16. It says, Other Benjamites and some men from Judah also came to David in his stronghold. David went out to meet them and said to them, If you have come to me in peace to help me, I am ready for you to join me. But if you have come to betray me to my enemies, when my hands are free from violence, may the God of our ancestors see it and judge you. He wasn't sure what they was coming up to him for, as far as the Messiah. But they were coming to be on his side. So what I'm saying is, this is amazing. This is just a little tiny excerpt of the book of Chronicles. Chronicles, the book that a lot of people skip over because it looks like it's just a bunch of genealogies, but every single book in this Bible, no matter how small it may seem, as soon as you really get into the stories, it comes alive. So I say all of this to say, you don't have to do, for those of you who know, like, there's a calling over your life, for those of you who God has told you that he's promised you something, that something is to come, but you're in that waiting season of when is it going to come? Let's say it's between that 40 years where God anointed you, but he hasn't appointed you, or whatever the situation might be in regards to God working in your life. You don't have to do anything in your might. This is where we get into, once you submit your life to God, that's free will. That's your choice. You have to do that part. But once you submit your life to God, this is when you take your hands off. This is the only thing you have to do is carry the cross daily. God sends everything else. He had a plan for David's life that looked, honestly, if it was me, if I were David, I would have been like, where is this army gonna come from? Notice these are people on the opposing side. I would have looked at it and been like, everybody has an army. I don't have an army. I wouldn't have thought that the people from the opposing side was just gonna come to me. Thinking small. It's amazing. Like, God literally sent these people, and I'm describing this in layman's terms. This is not what actually happened, but basically they just walked up right to his door and said, "Hey, we on your side now." Like, it there's nothing God cannot do. And when I think about that, it leads me also to remind you that when people say be careful of the people that you hang around, it's not just because of what we know already. Like, the first thing we think about is, oh, well, if they're living a crazy life, that can affect yours. If they're making crazy choices, that can affect yours. We're also talking about people that may not be living crazy lives. Maybe they're not making crazy choices, crazy to us, but maybe they think too small. Those are the worst, because they're, one, the hardest to leave typically for a typical human, because you don't think that there's anything wrong. But every now and then they tell you, like, they need to bring you back to ground, or bring your head back to ground, because they don't see what God is doing in your life, and they never were supposed to. That was never on them. But the voices that you listen to are so important. Don't ever listen to your mom, your dad, your cousin, your friend, your brother, your sister's voice over God. Ever. Because we are all human, and there's going to be moments, or maybe some people just have this entire personality to where they think small. They can't see beyond. Some people don't even have faith. You definitely shouldn't be listening to those people. But even some people that have faith, they just think too small. Even people that think that God is bigger than problems, just because they're saying that doesn't mean that that's what's actually in their heart. So be careful with the voices that you listen to, because this entire Bible is filled with situations that are impossible that happened. So if you have anybody around you telling you that you need to come back to ground, if you happen to tell them, which you honestly, you really shouldn't tell most people what you got going on, what God told you. You shouldn't tell them, because a lot of people don't have faith, and they're not going to see it. So unless God told you to finally expose it to certain people, don't tell them. Don't tell them, because the enemy can speak through them. This is the same thing as the placebo effect. Something that God put on my heart yesterday. I don't even know where it came from. I was just standing in my kitchen cooking, and I started thinking about the placebo effect. The placebo effect is something that the world has called, like, they put this name on faith, because that's actually what it is. You give a pill to a certain group of people, and then you don't give a pill to the other group of people, and you see how that pill affected that group of people, even though it was a sugar pill. It didn't actually do anything, but because they thought that the pill worked, it worked. That was not the pill. That was not the sugar. That was not some scientific thing. It was faith. Faith is a spiritual weapon that God created. It's the same thing. Faith moves mountains. It really does. It's not the placebo effect. is God.